Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. Something that I've been discussing at work over the last couple of weeks is password managers. This is not going to be your standard video telling you should use a password manager. Honestly, I'm kind of assuming that you already know that you should be using a password manager. And I'm not going to talk about what makes a good password or anything else like that because, again, that should be common knowledge. What I want to talk about is thinking about what goes into selecting a good password manager and how do you keep that available on different devices, and what are the benefits and disadvantages of choosing one method over another. As with many things that I talk about, the answers are going to be different depending on your specific situation. I'm not here to necessarily give you a hard and fast, this is the correct answer. These are just the things that you should keep in mind. So, let's start. A password manager. Basically, this is just something that records the passwords that you have for various websites, which should all be different. And it helps because a password manager can help generate random passwords that are suitable for use in these situations. And then it just records them and you can use that. Cool. How do you keep these passwords safe? They need to be encrypted. So that's basic table stakes, because if you can just look at them and know what the password is, it's not very useful now, is it? So it needs to be encrypted in order for this to be any sort of safe. And that also means that encryption is not sufficient. Because, okay, so it's encrypted, great. How does that encryption work? How does it work? Most encryption will use a password, okay? A password to protect your passwords. This is conceptually easy to understand. But, every time, you sign into a website with your password and your browser, whether it's Edge or Chrome or Firefox or whatever, pops up and says, hey, you want me to save this password? And you hit, sure, save it. Okay. How do you get that back? If you're like most people, you probably just go to the website and it says, I have a saved password for this. And you go, great, log in. But how is that safe? If you stop and think about it, that means that your browser has the ability to just pull passwords that you've given it and put them into a web page without requiring any information to be able to retrieve it. So how is it protecting those passwords? Yes, if you look at the documentation, your browser probably saves it in an encrypted store. But it's using this encryption with a password that has to be saved in plain text because it's not something that you're putting in there, which means anybody can go look at, what's the master encryption password? Oh, it's this thing. Okay, great. Well, great. All these passwords are now open to me. Perfect. Or worse, it would have to save it without encryption. I know that this is true for Firefox. I don't know about Edge or Chrome, but Firefox has the capability to add a master password to the password manager. And if you do that, then it's not using an encryption key that's just saved on disk somewhere so that Firefox can access it. It'll have to ask you for your master password in order to be able to unlock the encryption that then can protect your actual passwords in the password manager. And this is true for other password managers as well. If you're looking at something like 1Password or LastPass or Dashlane or Bitwarden or KeePass, whatever application you're using, it needs to keep the passwords encrypted. And in order to do that, it needs something that you provide in order to unlock that cache of passwords and be able to access the values so that then you can use them. So yes, it needs to keep it encrypted. It really should require a master password or some other form of identity verification. If you have a hardware token that you tap to authenticate yourself, or if you have a passkey or something else like that, that's fine too. The main thing is it can't just be there for the browser to pull from whenever it wants to, because that's not secure. I've seen a lot of clients who have had, 3, 4, 500 passwords saved in their browser cache, and you can just run a tool and say, here's all the passwords in plain text, because you don't have a master password set up on your browser. So I was able to just go and pull all the passwords because it's a wide open door. It's not great if you can do that. But browsers may have the option, and like I said, I know for sure Firefox does have the option to set a master password. They don't do that by default. That's something that you have to go in and set up if you're going to use it. Okay, so then you have a list of passwords. Great. On one device, where does it go? Does it synchronize somewhere? You could hope so. Certainly, a lot of devices, Firefox has Firefox Sync. Google, everything is saved with your Google account. So anywhere you sign in with your Google account, you can have your passwords with you. Okay, so these are all built in. Commercial services might have the same thing. They might have an online vault, something that you can just have a browser extension that'll connect to the browser, to the vault in the cloud, so that your browser can then access it. Okay, if you do that, then your password store is actually online. Okay. But then the question becomes, is that accessible by the online service? Because if it's accessible by the online service, then anybody who compromises that online service might be able to get a list of your passwords. And then you have to go through and reset all of these, and that's a real drag. So if the service has access to your passwords, then that's something that has to be done. Most of them will tell you that they don't have access to your passwords. It's only accessible by you using your master password. Maybe. In theory, that may be how it's supposed to work. But there has been research, and some of this was published earlier this week. Some services will also offer things like, well, if you've forgotten your master password, you can set up a recovery key. Okay. Sometimes those recovery keys were not authenticated. So you can actually get the service to give you access to the vault without being authenticated, or you could. Most of those issues have been closed now as a result of that research. Okay. So if the service can grant you access using some sort of recovery credential, what theoretically stops them from being able to generate that for anybody, including themselves? Now, I'm not saying that they would, because honestly, if they did, that would be a really good way to get everybody to stop using their product, and then they'd go bankrupt. So I'm not saying that commercial services do this. I'm saying it's a flaw or a possibility that might exist given the design of the system. That's all I'm saying. And so reviewing these designs, you go, okay, well, maybe that's not a big concern, but under normal circumstances, it shouldn't be available to anybody. Again, you would think. And yet, very well known, one of these providers, LastPass in particular, had a breach in the past. that exposed user passwords. If the commercial provider has a breach that exposes user passwords, clearly that's not limited to only your eyes. It was available to somebody else somehow through the service that does the upload. Okay. Maybe you look at all of this and you think, well, maybe keeping it in the cloud isn't for me. Maybe I want a little more security. Okay. There are services that also allow you to set up a password vault in a network on a server, and then it never leaves your site. Okay. Is that necessarily better? Because, okay, sure, it's on a system that you control, it's not in the cloud, and you can protect that, fine. But if somebody ever breaches your network, guess what their first target's going to be? One of their first targets is going to be that great big server that holds everybody's passwords in your organization for all of their online services, because it's all in one place. That's a great big huge flashing sign with the lights going that says, hey, over here, this is the mother lode, this is the jackpot. Maybe you don't want to have a target that big on the network, because think of how your compartmentalization works in a worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, if somebody gets into your network and you're housing all of your passwords locally on a central server, if they breach that server, it's game over for everything. All of your users, all of your passwords, period. If you're using an online service, okay, somebody breaks into the network, they manage to compromise one person's computer, then they have to crack the browser plugin, then they have to realize that they actually only have access to whatever that one person had access to. And they have to repeat this process on other machines, which may or may not have the same set of vulnerabilities. So it's going to be additional work. Okay, so that's, you have if you put them on a server on your network, you have the advantage of you don't have to rely on a cloud provider. You don't have to worry about how they authenticate, how they sync, how they secure their systems, how their design is set up. You just have to worry about your setup. But the disadvantage to that is you have to worry about your setup, because if you have any sort of a compromise in the network that renders that server vulnerable and they get to that server, then it's over. Pros and cons, things to consider, right? Okay, well, maybe we say, maybe I don't want to keep it in the cloud, and maybe a single server that's centralized is not really what I want. Maybe I'll just say everybody has this software installed on their own machine, and you just keep your list of passwords locally. You can do that. Now we get into the whole security versus usability trade-off, because that is very secure. And if you're like me, where yes, I have a single store of passwords on one machine, and then I manually copy that database, that encrypted database, to other devices that happen to need, where I happen to need some of those passwords, or just the entire store of passwords. It's protected by a really long master password, and I mean really long. And it doesn't go through a cloud provider. It doesn't go to a central server. It's very restricted in where it goes, but that's a lot of effort. If I update a password, I have to be responsible for keeping the databases in sync. How many times have I updated a password and then gone somewhere else and gone, oh, I haven't synchronized the databases yet, so I actually don't have this updated password available. I can't log in. Not right now, not until I go back home and then do a manual database sync. And conversely, if I'm out on the road, I'm like, okay, so I'm going to update this password because the site is requiring me to change my password. Okay. Oh, but this isn't my master password list that I have available right now. This is just, a read-only copy, essentially. Do I have the ability to create a 20-character random password and remember it long enough to get home and enter it into my master password list? Or do I have to set it to a password that isn't strong so that I can go back home and then hope that I remember to update the password on the website a second time and then update it in the master password list and then remember to synchronize the databases? Okay, so this is where you get into, this is a relatively secure setup. You're avoiding any cloud vulnerabilities. You're avoiding a centralized server. That's a great big target. But you're still left with, it is still a single location on a single machine. It may not be one machine that's common to the entire organization. Fine. But using it has a lot of restrictions. It's not simple. It's not necessarily easy, unless, like me, you're an admin and a tech head and you're just like, oh yeah, I can just totally do this. And when I know that it fails, I know that's because of me, and I just go, okay, well, I'll just have to live with it for the time being and then fix it later. And then remember to do so. So there's no one solution. There's no one way of setting this up that is perfect for everybody. And there's no one way that I can say, this is the right way to go. This is how it should be. Honestly, what works for me personally is probably really onerous for almost everybody else. And a lot of people won't want to do that. What works for some people, just put it in Chrome and it's readable to anybody else who gets access to your account because it's not protected by a master password. Okay, that's easy to set up and easy to use, but it's not very secure. You might go to something in the middle, and if we're setting stuff up for customers, this is something that we'll do. We'll say, okay, we think you should use a provider, a commercial provider with a cloud-based sync so that you can use it on separate devices. There's the usability that you need. It is per user, okay? So you can have the other usability benefits of being able to make a password available to a group of people without having to, share it using Post-it notes or something hokey like that. And it's not a target on your network. Maybe if you're in a different thing like a large enterprise or even government, maybe you have restrictions where, for security's sake, you're not going to rely on a commercial cloud provider, but instead, for reasons of regulation or policy, what have you, it needs to be on a locally controlled environment, a server or set of servers. And you just have to be willing to know, okay, this is on us to keep this protected. And if you're an admin for that, you had better be having the computing equivalent of bulletproof screenings around that server, because it's going to be a target. So the right solution is really going to come down to your individual circumstances. But these are some of the things that, as an admin, you have to be thinking about in order to say, this is the right decision, or this is the right decision, or there is no right decision, but on balance, I think the risk analysis leads us in this direction over here. These are just the things you have to think about. So hopefully that has been interesting and enlightening to some degree, at least. If you have thoughts on other things that you'd like to hear me talk about or things that you'd like to see me demonstrate, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door netadmin, and we will see you next time.